Welcome to Save Every Universe. My name is Robbie. I'm one of your co-hosts. So unfortunately, we had to change up our schedule a little bit. The other host, Alec, was unable to record due to a last-minute injury. So I thought I would take this opportunity to bring up one of our old episodes. It was Video Games as Art. After we recorded this episode, we found out that the Smithsonian has begun an annual exhibit called the Smithsonian Arcade, and we also started finding other art galleries in our own hometown of 8-bit art and that kind of thing. So, this was one of our earlier episodes. A lot of people probably didn't have the chance to listen to it. So this week, please enjoy Video Games as Art, and we will see you once again April 24th. Thank you for joining us. On this episode, we analyze the juxtaposition of contrasting elements.
Shut up! Welcome to Save Every Universe. I am a red cube of flesh that gets destroyed 1,000 times in my quest to save the bandage girl.
And I'm a red knight trying to rescue the 4 princesses and power crystal from a crazy wizard.
Nice. Who were you last week?
Last week I was Ryu from Street Fighter.
That one was a little too obvious, I felt like.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And your heroic plumber the other day when you were Luigi?
I put a little spin on it, though. Anyway, last week I was Alex Vance from Half-Life 2. Welcome to the show. This week we are going to talk about a very highbrow type topic, are video games art? And we kind of got talking about this based on an article by none other than Roger Ebert. He wrote an article saying video games can never be art. It's a little bit older. It's a 2010 article. Robbie sent this over to me and we started talking about it and doing a little research. What do you have on the docket today, Robbie? Do you have any thoughts you want to kick us off with here?
Yeah, I kind of just thought it would be fun to talk about how we view video games, whether or not it is art. There was a famous quote by, is it Hideo, the guy who created
Kojima?
Metal Gear? Yeah,
Hideo Kojima.
He also agrees that video games aren't art.
Interesting.
Yeah, and so I thought it'd be kind of fun, because as gamers, I think a lot of gamers feel the need to defend it as art, so we should probably, talk about that and explore that a little bit.
And that is an interesting point, too. Maybe we can get into that after we sort of dissect it a little bit and voice our opinions. At the end of the article, Roger Ebert says, why do gamers feel the need to defend games as art? Why can't you just enjoy them as a game, right? And so that is an interesting thing. Why is this even a discussion?
Sure.
What are some of your personal views? What are games art? What is your personal position on that?
Okay, well, if you took apart a video game and, cut it into its pieces on what makes a game.
Yeah.
If you took... Not every game, because some games are just scoreboard or whatever, but if you took a game and took a story, if you had a finely crafted narrative or a story or a book, you would consider that art. If you had beautiful music that was really amazing and moving and well composed, that would be considered art.
Yeah.
Visual graphics is considered an art.
Right.
Visual arts, graphical art design, all of that's considered an art.
Right.
But for some reason, there's some push that if you put it all together, it's no longer art.
It is interesting because if you took concept art from games that talented artists, who do the concept art for games, you could put the best of that together and show that in an art exhibit in a large major metropolitan museum of modern art. But you're exactly right. Once you take that and you put it into a digital rendering and then you put a controller in someone's hand, for some reason, that's not art, right?
Right. So we'll link Roger Ebert's article. But one of the points he talks about pretty early on in the article, as I recall, was that once you start playing it because you can beat it, it's no longer art.
Right.
And I was thinking about that. I actually had the opportunity to go to the Meow Wolf exhibit in Santa Fe.
Yeah.
And that's an interactive art display. It's made by an art group.
Right.
It's an art. Everyone considers it art, right? But it was, I don't know if you can beat it.
Right.
You can't really beat it, but you can experience it.
Yeah.
And you can experience it a number of ways. It's not linear.
Right.
Everyone did it in a different order. It's very interactive. You go through this house and papers and articles and all kinds of stuff. Very hands-on. So I didn't beat it at the end. I didn't walk out and get a trophy, but
Right.
it's not like every game is like that either. Not every game.
I would definitely agree with that. I think there's a line where not every video game is art, right? And so I'm looking at. I just looked up that Kojima quote. He says art is something that radiates the artist, arguing that if 100 people walk by and a single person is captivated by whatever that piece radiates, it's art. But video games aren't trying to capture one person. A video game should make sure that all 100 people that play the game should enjoy the service provided by that video game. So by definition, but that's different than Ebert's argument, right? Because Kojima's saying video games are geared for mass appeal, more like a blockbuster movie or something like that.
Right.
It's such a sticky thing because it's like Kojima is saying, take a big blockbuster movie. Like, The Avengers is not an artistic film the same way like a really indie Academy Award winning thing that a shitload of people aren't going to see, but they would all agree that it's a fine film and that it's fine cinema and it's art and all this other crap. But like The Avengers isn't art. I don't think a lot of people would agree on that.
True, but the comic books it's based on, some of it is.
But the drawing style would be art. But comics wouldn't be art. You don't, like, I guess what I'm saying is that there's not like this... There's not really like a definition. Like, people argue like it's this firm one or the other position, and like it kind of seems like nobody agrees on it.
Well, that's kind of the fundamental, and it's probably hard to not somewhat address this, right? What is art? You're going to end up there anyway.
Right.
So, and I think Ebert quoted the Plato or the Aristotle quote of art as an imitation of nature.
Yeah.
Which I'm not entirely, I don't know, that's a...
Well, how do you? Yeah,
of course, it's a Greek philosopher type.
I don't think that's a good definition because, like, a very skilled painter who can reproduce nature with paint, like, obviously that person's an artist. But what about like surrealist art and like there's all these other branches where they exaggerate real life, and you won't ever see anything in real life that looks like that, but it still captures a true idea that you encounter in real life.
Right. So, but I also don't want to go too far the other way where I just say art's whatever make you get the feels. You know what I mean? Like, even though I am
but so there are some people that say that is, it's, you know, the artist takes a feeling or an idea that they want to communicate and then they put it into a physical expression that other people can appreciate and consume. Right. So bringing it back to video games, like Little Nightmares is an indie game that I thought was fantastic. And as I was playing it, everything in that game to me felt like art. Like the art style itself, actually, like the visual style and the character design, everything in that game is like, you could take a little picture of it and it was like this really dark artistic expression. But then as you're playing through the game, there's this idea of, I think the game used to be called Hunger, and then they like rebranded it or whatever. But as you go along through the game, you're this sad little girl that like is in the slums, and then as you go along at the end of the first level, somebody gives you food because you get really hungry at the end of each level, and the stranger out of the kindness of their heart gives you food. And the farther you go up, you get hungry at the end of each level, and you get more savage and evil, sort of, as you ascend to like the higher levels of society where they have plenty and that kind of thing. And as I was playing through this game, I was like, this is clearly like an artistic commentary on the division between rich and poor, and like it was a piece of art from start to finish, that game. But like, I wouldn't say Call of Duty is a piece of art. So I wouldn't say that all games are art either.
No, I wouldn't say all video games are art. I think it's interesting because it seems that some people are very hung up on the medium of ingestion, I suppose, of like how you experienced the art determines whether or not it's art.
Yeah.
Because I bet you could take, you know, probably critics, if you just took pictures of that and didn't tell them it was from a video game, they'd say it was art. And then as soon as you said, this is from a video game, well, it's no longer art.
Right.
And kind of like what we were saying before.
Right.
But I don't think that that's fair.
Right.
I don't think that's fair to just... we're kind of moving away from that anyway. Like, being able to express art in certain ways and certain functions. And some people make fun of that. I think there's that Parks and Rec episode where it's like People Farm. Do you remember that episode where her friend is like a cow and it's all society and like...
You're right.
The real animals are the people coming to watch.
Right.
Do you remember that? It's April's friend or whatever.
Yeah. But okay, but if artists do that, it's like avant-garde experiential art.
But it's not to everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because somebody like me would just go, that's stupid. That's not art, right? And, you know, you hear like forced, weird, creative stuff. And some people will go, "Oh, that's really art," and some people won't. And maybe some of this whole debate could be that we're part of the now minority, going, "Hey, some of this is actually art," and the rest of the world who aren't gamers, like, you guys are freaks,
right?
So in some ways, this has been going on a long time as people tried to find new mediums of expression or new methods to capture these feelings. But I think it's expanding. Gaming's becoming more popular too.
Right.
Not just because of Call of
and I
Duty.
think the gaming industry is attracting like different kinds of talent too.
Right.
Like, they're actually hiring real writers, and like before it was just sort of like people who knew how to make video games, and then they would create stories out of it and stuff.
Right.
And so I'm not knocking it. Some of the best video games ever came from people like that. But like they're actually hiring people that's what they do. They are story crafters and writers, and they are artists with words, and they're hiring those people, and they're hiring artists like visual artists. And I don't know, how do you have a team of artists
and then you claim what they create is not art?
I don't get that. It's just so subjective that it's like it's not that different from when we talked about hardcore, softcore, hardcore, casual. Sorry,
gamer.
Hardcore, softcore sounds like porn, but hardcore
That's
versus
a different episode.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Sex in video games. But hardcore versus casual, it was like it's sort of determined by who's inside and who's outside.
Right.
And Roger Ebert even kind of touches on this a little bit, where he sort of tongue in cheek says, "My taste, like, this is subjective, and it's a matter of your taste." And
the Sparks novel,
and then he
versus
says parentheses, but according to me, my taste is better, and I'm more right, basically. And he says he has a bias towards cinema and all these other things. And I do think that the art or not art is kind of one of those questions where it's insider versus outsider. If you're inside the bubble, you can see all these nuances and appreciate.
Right.
Because he's seeing video games as an outsider. If you talk to someone who has played Little Nightmares or any of those great indie games, or a game like The Last of Us, there you can see the artistic expression of that thing. Well, I'm an insider.
I'm pretty sure he himself, when he's going through, so the TED Talk he's criticizing, which is criticizing him, that TED Talk, he goes through the individual games, but he went through it as somebody who looked up stories about the games. He looked up summaries of the games or screenshots of the games.
Right.
He didn't truly play them. And that would be kind of, to me, that's the equivalent of trying to explain to a blind person the beauty of Van Gogh or something. How do you truly explain it if you haven't gone start to finish and experienced it yourself?
Right.
Part of, and you would argue that with any other art piece.
Right.
It's hard to argue. You can convince somebody to go play Last of Us, but you can't truly explain to them why it's so gut-wrenching, the deep emotional appeal, why it's something that's haunts your dreams, or something that hung over you or thought about the way you raised your children. You can't really explain that. You have to just
from the
experience
outside.
it.
You have to actually play it.
You can two people who have done it can talk about it.
Yeah.
Right. But that's true with art too. You're like, oh, dude, what did you think of this? What did you think of that? That's really cool.
Yeah.
But unless you've experienced it, you won't know how to appreciate it. And I think while Roger Ebert's article is extremely well written,
and he does make a lot of smart points,
great points, but he fails to experience video games. I don't think he can properly say it any more than we can.
Yeah.
I wouldn't appreciate some of the movies he probably would consider art.
Yeah.
Because I'm not a true cinephile. I'm a guy who liked going to the movie theater a lot, which is a lot different. I've watched all the Avengers movies. I haven't necessarily seen some of the more indie.
Yeah. But someone who has played a lot of video games and really analyzed how they work and studied why and how they work and all that kind of thing, it would be like that person sort of telling Roger Ebert how to appreciate a movie or what he doesn't get about a movie or whatever. You know what I mean? I don't know.
Right. When art is kind of funny in that if you haven't experienced it. So I don't know why I keep thinking of Parks and Rec examples, but do you remember the episode where Tom buys that abstract painting?
Oh,
and starts weeping?
Yeah, and he's like, this is making me feel something.
Yeah,
I don't know
and he
why.
doesn't know why, and every time he looks at it, he cries. And then he tries to make the artist make another one, but it doesn't have the same impact.
Yeah.
I mean, and that was kind of a unique experience to him. So in that, I would somewhat disagree with what's the Metal Gear Solid creator? Hideo Kojima? Is it Kojima? Kojima.
I'm probably saying that wrong, but that's the basic.
I apologize, but I would disagree with him because I don't feel like as much of the video games are just created for this mass appeal, crank out, manufactured.
It does sound though like that was part of Roger Ebert's criticism too. He says toward the end of her presentation, because he's talking about the lady who gave the presentation that they were criticizing each other, sort of. Toward the end of her presentation, she shows a visual with 6 circles, which represent, I gather, the components now forming her brave new world of video games as art. The circles are labeled development, finance, publishing, marketing, education, and executive management. I rest my case. And so it sounds just sort of like what Hideo Kojima was saying, and they're sort of saying the same thing, that the economic machine that pushes behind video games to market them is what makes it not art.
Right, but that can't be true, because that's saying that if you make money off of it, it's not art.
Right.
Isn't that what he's... I didn't like that, because that's what he's kind of arguing.
Or that you're engineering it for mass appeal. When you engineer something for mass appeal, it's not art, I think is what they're saying.
True, but some of these movies that win Oscars and stuff were... They use like big name actors. I mean, like La La Land was probably created not necessarily like a tool in the machine, but it was created hoping to touch on something within everyone.
Right.
Some of these visionaries believe that they can capture something that everyone will agree with, or a lot of people will.
See, and that's an interesting question, right? Because like Little Nightmares, right, is just an example that's fresh in my mind. To me, that game is a playable piece of art, and you don't really like, you get to the end of the game, you beat it, there's levels, but you don't really like win the game in the same way that you would win a game of chess or win a game of Pong. And this is true for The Last of Us as well. You don't like win it. The story resolves. And going back to the original point, most people won't play Little Nightmares, just like most people won't see a lot of those movies that win Academy Awards. But like, where's the line between... That still had to go to a theater for some people to see for it to win an award.
Right.
The Little Nightmares still had, even though I think, or The Last of Us, it still had to get produced in a disc and go out to stores, and it still had to end up on the PlayStation Store or on the Xbox Live Store or whatever. So where the hell's the line in getting it to the public for anyone to consume it and
making it available,
and it being crass commercialism?
Right. I mean, it's not like Emma Stone and Ryan Gosling like chose they didn't go to somebody's backyard and be like, hey man, you're
Let's
trying
make a movie.
Yeah. I mean, they picked a reputable guy. Yeah. They like made sure it was all very processed in Hollywood.
They gathered up a pool of people who were artistically talented to create something that would move people emotionally.
Right.
How the fuck is that not art?
And they believed in that vision.
And how the hell is that different from a video game?
So I do have a problem with
that. I do
that.
think some video games are like truly like it is like it's about a point system, or it's about winning, or it's about simple mechanics that are fun, and those games are not art. Those are sort of in a different category. But games like Little Nightmares or The Last of Us or whatever, they're not about winning. They're about communicating an idea.
Maybe we should quickly touch on that. So just the fact that you experience it, I don't think that's enough to say it's not art.
Right.
Video games. But maybe there are some harder and faster rules, bright line rules that you could say, like point systems or competitive.
Yeah.
Those are probably, you're getting pretty far away from art at that point.
Yeah. Well, and the name attached to video games, the game component of that, right? Like Mahjong or chess, those are all games kind of in the same family, but video games have like evolved from like where they came from.
It's true.
And it's like, I don't know if you can...
Even the term video game sounds pretty weird if you think about it.
Yeah.
Vidya, put it in the VCR. Like,
right.
It's not really like, I don't know. I know that it's probably not going to change, or maybe the kids will come up with some slang someday that changes it. Right. But even the term video games is a little bit misleading.
Right. Because, and like a lot of the games we're talking about, are like border a little bit more on experiential art or interactive fiction than they do like on a like video game, a visual game, a digital game. Because there's a massive difference between chess on Mac with the AI and whatever else.
That's true, but some chessboards are so beautiful they would be a work of art.
The visual
board
component
itself,
of it,
maybe not the games. Yeah. None of the games I've ever played were works of art.
So, but okay, if you get into the realm though of like experiential stuff, like architecture, a beautifully designed building that you like walk through and experience every day, is architecture not art then?
Buildings, I think, can be.
That's what I'm saying.
And architects aren't. I mean. Architects notorious, from my experience, it's not like as math based. It's more about being an artist, about like designing a beautiful.
So let's use that as an example. Architects take artistic aesthetic beauty and then they blend that with practical functionality.
It's got to be functional to some degree.
But a really beautiful building, like people study that as art. People study that as a representation of like a civilization, of a culture. So I think a lot of people at least would agree that architecture is art, right? But they overlap two things. One of them is not art. Functionality and like practical durability and all these other things. So games I think the games that we're talking about are that, right? Where they blend artistic design and storytelling that isn't about winning, but it's about resolving a story and telling a story and moving people emotionally.
Yeah.
And then they happen to pair that to game mechanics. I think it's not that different than from like architecture. You know what I mean? The way that architecture overlaps. Are there architects who just make like Nazi-looking bunkers or whatever, like World War II era, like cinder blocks and puke green walls, and it's like there's no beauty to it, but there's functionality. That's not art,
right?
But there's these cathedrals that are still technically architecture. They technically have the same job, but they've raised it to an artistic level.
Yeah, I agree, and I think in that sense she's the TED Talk, the speaker, I think she's right in that it's just kind of a new world and it's evolving.
Yeah.
And so we are seeing some of the like basic beginnings of this expression.
Yeah.
And these aren't new ways of like telling these stories.
Right.
But in some ways they're superior.
Right.
Like I feel more attached to some of these characters and some of these books than I would like a show or even a movie.
Yeah.
Because you become more invested in it. But I don't think that kills it as art.
Right.
Should we address the question though that like why are we even talking about this in the first place?
Yeah.
Do we have time for that?
Do you have a thought to kick us off on there?
I was thinking about that because we went from, at least for me, I went from like a pudgy junior high kid trying to explain why this is important to me, right? And now we're like fully grown adults who, are well read and intelligent, but we still like these things. So there is probably somewhat of a justification in that. It's not just a kid's toy.
Right.
It's not just like some dumb, cheesy, and I think to me as a gamer, I get somewhat offended by something like that I pursue, like The Last of Us, or some games, I'm not saying all games, being compared with like a childish toy.
Right.
Though I don't find myself often trying to argue why it's art.
Right.
I do find myself wanting to justify why it's like not just a waste of time or why it's not just.
Yeah, I think that is part of it. Like where Roger Ebert does mention like, why do they require validation is what he asked. And I think to some degree, yes, like gamers kind of do. People who like they love games so intensely, I do like sort of want the world to recognize like how good like video games have gotten, and that they're not just Super Mario now, like old school Super Mario. Even Super Mario's evolved. Right. Like I think there is some degree of like gamers wanting games to be recognized as not just a kid's toy. Right.
Well, I mean, and because there's so many legitimate endeavors you can do with the games, there's so many, in fact, we've decided to make a podcast, and we think we can crank out an episode a week about it.
Yeah.
There's so many aspects of gaming. I had a roommate. After you moved out, we had a random guy move in with us, and if he came in and saw us gaming, he'd be like, "So is this your plan today?" And we always wanted to slap the hell out of him. But anyway, you always feel a little bit like people like that are likening your gaming to like sitting around watching Desperate Housewives all day.
Right.
There are probably games where that's fair.
But even that, like binging Netflix, is more socially acceptable.
That's more socially
gaming.
acceptable than gaming. It's like somehow worse than that.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. I think that's offensive. That's so offensive to like somehow compare like I'm solving puzzles.
Yeah.
I'm reacting to things.
Yeah.
I'm even socializing
with
friends, to compare that to me like watching some mindless television, which is fine in its own right.
Right.
But to somehow like make them parallel or liken them to one another is offensive.
And I think that's part of the deal too, because like even you like with The Last of Us, using that as an example, if you go on YouTube and you look up like people react to The Last of Us, and it's like people who usually don't play games playing the opening scene of The Last of Us, which is incredibly emotional and tragic and all this other stuff. And like most of them are like teared up by the end of it, and they all like say, "Holy shit, that was like a movie." And like even that is like a little bit offensive to me, because it clearly moved them in a deep emotional way, and their only comparison is that's like a movie. Whereas like if you're a gamer on the inside, you're like, "No, that's a fucking good game." Like, and it's different
more,
from a movie
almost because you did it.
And I think it's not just like wanting validation, like my games are cool, right, guys? It's like we know like how damn good these things can be. And it's why can't other people see that? Like is more the thing.
Yeah, I agree, and not everyone's going to get it. And I've at this point in my life have come to terms with that. But I do think I think you'd be a lot harder pressed to make those arguments of it not being art, and if you've truly sat down and played it.
Right.
You know? I mean, give Last of Us some type of easy mode and let Roger Ebert play it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I bet by the end of that,
it has talented actors, just like, you know, like if it was Roger Ebert, like if you were drawing that movie comparison with him, like it has actors, it has a cast, it had a script, it has like,
right.
It has everything there, but it puts you in the center of it and allows you to be a part of it and interact with it.
I gotta say though, even as I say, like, give him an easy mode, that still isn't part of it, because some of that fear of death kind of gets you invested. If you knew you were a god and couldn't die in Last of Us, it would kill it a little bit. You know, there is some of that losing a level and having to get back up and try it again.
And that's actually, okay, so we talked about this in why Last of Us was one of my favorite games, and they talk about this if you look at the behind the scenes stuff, that Joel, when they were coming from Uncharted and then coming over to The Last of Us, they gave his build like a whole different design, but they gave his, like, the feel of how Joel moves a completely different feeling. And that's what you just said is an example of using those game mechanics to tell the story where it transcends. It's not just, it's like where the architect uses functionality and practicality and then elevates that up to a level of high art kind of thing. To me personally, I don't see how you couldn't see that comparison to other kinds of art where two things overlap.
Yeah. I don't think every video game is art, but
absolutely not.
I'm not sure I'm willing to say just because it made money or just because they're trying to draw on something that, you know, everyone wouldn't relate to. I don't think that alone disqualifies it either.
Right.
It's not like all successful musicians are bad.
Right.
Some of them are just pop stars singing about sex, and they're going to be successful. But some of them are making really beautiful, cool stuff, and everyone just digs that.
Right.
And that they're successful at doing that.
Yeah.
That doesn't make it.
Yeah, like is all pop music not art? I like that's crazy too.
Right.
Like,
just because it's successful doesn't mean it's bad.
Yeah.
But then, you know, then there's the inherent trap of chasing the success kind of kills the art, blah, blah, blah. But that's not really what we're talking about.
And now we're kind of back in that seat, though, of like, does it pander to like what's popular, and is it crass commercialism? Or is there an actual, like, did the artist actually want to communicate something meaningful, like, with that piece of art, which some pop music does.
Some does.
Yeah, and then some of it's just bubblegum summer top down, whatever.
Yeah, and they make the most money.
Yeah, they do.
But that, again, I don't think that just disqualifies it on its face because it made money, you know?
Yeah, I think in any creative field, and you can't, at the very minimum, you have to agree that video games is creative. In any creative field, I think there's going to be that separation of... some of it's mass appeal stuff and some of it's this or that, but get granular, go through it with a comb, and you're gonna find stuff that is on the level of fine art.
Right. And if you don't feel like it's art, that's okay. There's plenty of things that I don't think are art that are in museums worth millions of dollars, and I think it's crap, but that doesn't mean I'm right.
Yeah.
And as more people experience video games and like video games, the art's going to grow too, because there's going to be a bigger audience, it'll be more widely accepted, and probably 1,000 years from now, people are going to think it's crazy that we even had this talk. You know?
Right.
They're going to be like, where was the question? You know? But until then, you know, we're kind of in the pioneering stage.
Yeah, I think that's true. Thank you for listening to Save Every Universe. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes, Podbean, or Google Play.
Like us on Facebook.